Welcome to Nobilis Erotica, episode 369. I am your host, Nobilis Reed. This episode of Nobilis Erotica is sponsored by the generous patronage of Nobilis Erotica listeners. If you'd like to help out paying the authors and voices that create these stories, visit patreon.com/Nobilis. And if you're already a patron, thank you so much for your help. This month's patron-funded story is the beginning of a new monthly serial. I'm proud to bring you Dungeon by Marjorie Greene. Like most of Marjorie's stories, this is a monster sex story with lots of scenes of people getting sexed up hard without consent, so consider that before listening any further. Marjorie Greene is the author and artist who brought us the stories Type 4 and Slick back in 2013. She says of herself, "These stories are not simply about sex. They cover a wide variety of topics and issues, and quite often express my own frustrations with people who consider themselves open-minded or unprejudiced. Growing up, I found most people to be incredibly blind when it came to real ethics and moral issues. Hypocrisy is always easier than diligence, which is why I would rather be known as a hardcore sinner than a part-time Christian." These stories are read by Honey Rambler, who is also a returning Nobilis Erotica veteran. Here we go.
Dungeon by Marjorie Greene. Episode 1. Wendell hated Highborn. He despised everything about them. Their arrogance, gratuitous displays of wealth, their birthright entitlement attitudes, even their smell. He might have found a way to get used to that last, as it wasn't a bad smell. Rather nice, actually, just overdone. Like everything else in this world. The King's Hall was the worst. Decadence prime. Purposely designed to flaunt the Lord's wealth and self-importance. And sitting atop it all was His Majesty himself, decked in gold embroidered red and purple, with a heavy crown no doubt worth more by itself, even melted down, than the entire village proper below. And he waited. Wendell hated waiting even more than the Highborn. Money, power, trivialities he could reaccumulate easy enough, but time, that was lost forever. Waiting was just flushing time down the gutter. The wizard was just considering whether screaming out at the top of his lungs would change things for the better or worse, when an underling signaled that he should come forward. "Your Highness," he said in a greeting, eager to get to the matter at hand. "Ah, Wendell, step closer if you will. I have a task for you." Intrigued, he moved up until he was within easy speaking distance. "A task, my liege?" Perhaps this wasn't simply a social call after all. Yes. I heard an interesting story the other day about an artifact, a runestone known as the Charding." Wendell paled, sighing. Apparently the king noticed his reaction. "You know of it, then?" He chose his words carefully. "I know of its legends. It is something left over from the olden, before the realms of humans walked the plains. It is said to have the power to fold space, to instantly move the bearer from one place to another." "Do you believe these legends?" asked the king. He tilted his head to the side. "I believe they have possible merit. The runestones are known to my sect. What is your interest in this stone, my liege?" "I want you to retrieve it for me." He just blinked. "I beg your pardon, my lord. I must have misheard you." "I said I want you to bring it to me." This day was not turning out in a good way. "Majesty, the runestones are buried in locations protected by dark magic, in dungeons meant to dissuade even the most hardy of warriors, though many have tried. They are not meant to be in the hands of humankind. Even if I wanted to accept such a quest, it is not known which of these dungeons contains that particular stone." "I know where it is," said the king. Not to doubt you, my lord, but you do? How did you come across this information?" "That's not your concern, and this is not a request. It's a command. You will retrieve the charting stone and deliver it to me here under the requirements of your sect. You can take as many as 100 troops if you wish, as well as whatever supplies you need, but you will do this for me." Wendell thought hard and fast. Refusing the king wasn't an option, so he was right and truly fucked. He was bound by serious law to answer the king's requests or be hunted down by his own people. He could quit, but that would mean basically throwing away decades of his life's work. No, he would do what the king asked of him. The only question was, how could he profit from this disaster? "I see. May I know the location, as it will guide the resources I require?" "Volscork. You will find the stone there." "Oh, dear God." "More so," continued the king, "since I don't trust you not to simply take the stone for yourself, I am sending along a representative." The wizard snapped his head up. What now?" "My niece shall accompany you." He indicated someone who had just come into the room. Wendell turned and did a double take. The young woman approaching the throne was dressed in leathers and light armor. She carried a spear and wore a large shield on her back. She was also easily the most attractive warrior he had ever seen, with ginger hair and a face that looked playful yet somehow menacing at the same time. "Hello, uncle," she said in greeting. "Is this the wizard?" "Indeed. Don't let him out of your sight, Taya. I don't think his heart is in this." Wendell was so entranced by the other's appearance that he momentarily lost his train of thought. When he picked it up again, he quickly turned back to the king. "Your Majesty, you can't send her to Volscork. That place, it's not safe for—" "Enough!" said the highborn loudly. "She goes." But sire—" "One more word from you, wizard, and I'll have your eyes plucked out. Begone!" He remained silent, bowing in resignation, then leaving the room. Finally, when the doors to the king's hall had closed behind him, he let out a string of curses that literally caused the light in the anteroom to dim for several seconds. Then he noticed the young woman standing nearby. She had a slight grin. "Most of the time I feel the same way about him," she said. "Sorry about that. I didn't realize I wasn't alone." "Forget it. Just because he's my uncle and my king doesn't mean I have to like the guy. I do what he says in public, as do you." She pinned him down with a look. He sighed, resigned. "So," she said, straightening up. "Ready to go pick out some troops?" "Taya, was it? My name is Wendell Alcott, Grand Master Wizard of the Fourth Order and Lightspringer Exemplar. And we won't be needing any troops." "Bucking my uncle already. He was serious about blinding you, you know." "I know he was. We won't be needing troops because they would be useless. Worse than useless in Volscork. We will need some supplies, though." He started to walk back to the inner keep. "Tell me, Taya, do you know how to use that spear? Or is it just to keep bothersome suitors away?" "Oh, I know how to use it, though I haven't skewered a wizard in a few weeks." He glanced over at her, unable to read her features. "Apologies, I did not mean to imply. I fought in 5 full campaigns, Master Wendell, 2 of which left me seriously injured. To the best of my knowledge, I have personally killed 158 men, a dozen or so wargs, and 1 troll, earning me the command rank of lieutenant, as well as 2 commendations for bravery. So while my spear may indeed fend off possible suitors, it cuts just as easily through pesky magic users." "I deserve that. Again, I ask your forgiveness, Lieutenant. I don't usually make such pithy comments. This whole business with the runestone and your uncle has me flustered." "Forgotten. Since we're stuck with each other, I say we focus on preparations and leave the small talk for the road, yes?" "Excellent idea. We'll be needing horses acclimated to lower altitude." 4 hours later, they were on the road headed into the lowlands. The air was warm but humid, and a storm looked to be coming in from the east. "So why no troops?" asked the redhead, trotting beside him. "You mentioned they would be useless. Why?" Frowning, he looked at her. "You have read the stories of the 7 demons, yes?" "Of course, but I don't see how." "About 300 years ago, 7 greater demons were given watch over the runestones, charged with keeping them out of the hands of the humans that had slowly encroached upon the Vale. To this end, each demon made a dungeon, a catacomb deep beneath the earth, filled with traps and dark magic, and tailored to the specific tastes of each demon. Brael, for example, was exceptionally fond of complex puzzles and riddles, and so his dungeon was a maze of such conundrums. Tokar was a warrior. His caves held some of the most fearsome creatures ever seen by man. And then, of course, there was Volscork." "What was his specialty?" she asked. Again he glanced at the young woman, squinting. "Is it possible? You honestly don't know, do you?" "Know what?" "How can that be? You said you had read the tales." "Sure, but just the children's versions when I was young." Again he let out a string of curses. "Damn your uncle! He had no right to put you into a position like this unknowing, even if he were ignorant of the dangers, which I'm not entirely sure he was." "What are you talking about? What's so special about Volscork?" He sighed. "That demon specialized in corrupting the mind. Volscork used fear, seduction, temptation, lust, destroying those fools who entered into his domain with their own thoughts. And he had a particular fondness for human females, warriors just like yourself. He even created a bogus legend that his runestone could only be accessed by a woman, just so that it would attract foolhardy feminine treasure-seekers. Few ever returned from those caves, but those that did were almost always impregnated with all manner of vile offspring." The lieutenant looked suddenly mortified. "Wait, impregnated?" "The small number who managed to flee before it was too late told of living walls of flesh, and traps so devious that you didn't even know you were caught until it was far too late. The demon's creatures in that dungeon would capture and torment a female victim's mind with ceaseless sexual ecstasy, eventually shattering their will and leaving them trapped for the rest of their days as little more than a breeder for more dark denizens. From the moment we step foot in those tunnels, the dark magic there will be a constant pressure on us. I can protect myself, certainly, which is no doubt why your uncle asked me to go in the first place. I might even be able to extend that protection to you. But an entire army? Impossible. Let me guess. You're the youngest officer in his command, aren't you?" She stared at him. "How did you—" "He knows that you probably haven't yet heard the details of those stories. He knew that I wouldn't take an army to assault that dungeon, and he knew right from the start that he would be putting you especially in mortal peril. You mentioned back at the keep that you didn't like your uncle. Is the feeling perhaps mutual?" She was silent for an uncomfortable time. "Just after my 16th birthday, my uncle tried to get me into his bed. I rebuffed him, of course, but he persisted. Finally, after coming dangerously close to being raped, I joined the guard, if only to keep me out of his reach. He never forgave me that choice." "Looks like he's getting his payback." "Damn. Fucking bastard. I thought I was past all that crap. So, can you protect us, I mean? Both of us?" Wendell sighed. "I honestly don't know. Probably. It will certainly weaken me. It's an issue that will be additive. The longer we're in those tunnels, the harder it will be for me to block the dark magic." "I guess we'll just have to hurry then," she said with a half grin. That evening, they made camp near the edge of the king's forest. It was at least another half-day's ride to the entrance of Volscork's dungeon, but Wendell suggested that it would be better if they stayed clear of the veil. "It's a little like a living entity," he explained, as they sat by the fire enjoying a meal. Neither wanted to speak more of the horrors they might face, but some things just required background. "It knows when an invader enters. The longer we are within the borders, the greater the chance that the veil will discern our intent and try to stop us." "It can read our minds?" she asked, taking a bite of rabbit. "Sort of. It feels life force, especially in someone so young." She snorted. "Hey, I'm no child, Master Wizard." He tilted his head to the side. "Really? If I may ask, how many seasons are you?" 20? 22. "Ah, and now me. How old would you guess me to be?" Taya took a moment and looked him up and down thoroughly, paying particular attention to his hands and face. "Not yet 40, I'd say." He laughed aloud, and Taya frowned. "What? Too high?" Grinning, he leaned forward for emphasis. "Girl, by wizard standards, I'm not yet middle-aged, but I swear on my mother's grave that I am 138 seasons." She was incredulous. "It can't be. Is it by magic? Some illusion, perhaps?" "It is no illusion. I am as you see me. However, you are correct that my health and youthful appearance is maintained through magic. It restores me constantly, even heals me when necessary. It gives me strength and years that can stretch well into 3 centuries or even more." She seemed lost in thought. Why don't others use such gifts?" "Gifts? Oh, no. The use of magic is no gift, my dear. It is paid for daily, I assure you." "But to be able to live to be 300! He met and held her eyes. "It is not a gift. It is a curse, Taya." "How? How can such thing be a curse?" "Have you loved?" She drew back. "What do you mean?" "I mean, have you ever fallen in love?" "That's a bit of a personal question." He waited. "Yes," she said finally. "Once, just after my 17th season day." "And?" Her brows furrowed in remembered pain. "He was killed in battle." Nodding, Wendell allowed her a moment. "I'm sorry. This is the dichotomy of love. It is the sweetest, most wonderful of feelings, but it is as equally painful when it ends." "Yes," she agreed, while looking into her lap. "Imagine, then, being old enough to experience that pain over and over again for centuries. My magic keeps me youthful, not so those I love. It is a horrible thing to have to watch someone age while you stay young, seeing them succumb to disease or the basic cruelty of our world. And that same magic that gives me so many seasons also keeps my mind sharp, my memory clear and crisp. I do not forget with time. That is why it is a curse." "I understand," she said, nodding. "It must be a difficult life. To be a wizard, I mean." "Quite. Though more frustrating than difficult, usually. We are busy folk. Despite living so long, we are almost always short on time. There is ever more to do and learn. Love and relationships tend to be very distracting. Most wizards try to avoid them, actually." "But you still have needs. Surely you're not celibate." He guffawed aloud. "Hardly. Yes, we have needs like any other human. We just find it more productive to deal with such requirements in a more efficient way." "I don't—" she started, confused. "Usually a nice brothel, my dear." "Oh." Morning brought with it a heavy fog that persisted through dawn. The lieutenant noticed as the wizard stood facing west toward the veil that he seemed preoccupied. Something wrong? Perhaps. I'm trying to decide if the mists work for us or against us. She looked east as well. Won't they hide our entrance into the Vale? Certainly, but they will hide possible enemies as well. But if they don't know we're here... He stopped her. You make an assumption, Lieutenant. That can be fatal in the lands we are about to enter. There are forces beyond that do not require eyes in order to detect us, as well as foes that see a fair bit better in such weather than we do. Oh. It's also unlikely that this is just a natural phenomena. She was surprised. Really? But who? Is it dark magic? Most likely. As for who, well, that is a good question. I suppose we shall find out soon enough. He clicked his horse forward, and a moment later she followed. As they passed the border into the dark lands, Wendell was glad to have a companion that seemed to understand the advantages of quiet. The woman did not speak again until they stopped about an hour later and dismounted, and then it was only after he did. We'll water the horses here while I get my bearings. I'm amazed you have any idea at all where we are. I can't see more than a dozen paces in any direction. She turned in a circle. A simple compass spell, protected against any mayhem that the Vale might throw at it, he replied, smiling. So, can you feel it yet? The presence of the Vale? She frowned. There is something. It's almost like we're being watched. Yes, and we are. The deeper we go, the stronger that feeling will grow. Pay it mind, but do not let it bother you. Keep your focus out here. He pointed to the green grass around them. We have little advantage in these lands. You might want to move away from those mushrooms. Huh? She looked down and saw she was standing near a small patch of cream-colored caps a few inches tall. While she tried to understand how such a fungus could be a threat, she noticed that there were a number of thin green tendrils reaching out of the ground. Her mouth fell open as they slowly started to curl around her boots. She went to jump back and instead fell over backwards. As soon as she hit the ground, other tendrils reached up where her hands landed, twining through her fingers and working up her arms. Ah! I can't get loose! There was abruptly an arm under hers, helping to lift her. The tendrils seemed to give up and retreated back into the ground as she moved clear of the fungus. Catch your morals, said Wendell in explanation. Very tasty if you can keep from being caught. Staring at the now peaceful-looking mound, she tried to quiet her pounding heart. What would they have done to me? Oh, probably nothing. Other than binding you up like a Falls Day hen, they're not entirely sinister. They'd just hold on to you until you died of dehydration or starved. Then you would decompose as a nice fertilizer for their colony. You don't call that sinister? He laughed softly. Oh, no, not at all. As strange as it seems to you and I, those mushrooms were merely taking advantage of a passing organic to survive. No, sinister would be if they had stripped you out of your clothes and pleasured you to death. She blinked, incredulous. Turning back to stare at the mushrooms, Taya swallowed. And know this, Lieutenant. There are most definitely things here that will do that to you, especially where we are heading. I'm really starting to hate the Vale, she commented, returning to her horse. I'm sure the feelings are mutual, he agreed. Over the next hour and a half, Wendell kept them on a straight course. The fog turned from a still, heavy mist into thick but sporadic clouds along the ground. A mild breeze blew the forms past them, sometimes parting to expose an incredible landscape of green grass and rocks that seemed endless. There were a few trees, but the wizard purposely avoided them, giving a wide berth. Finally, the man stopped and pointed down the far side of the hill they had just peaked. There, see it? Taya squinted into the fluffy whiteness, but could see nothing. I don't. Wait for it. There! For just a moment, there was a break in the clouds. For a second or two, she saw something that looked like a pair of tall stones. Whatever it wasn't natural. "Volscork?" she asked. "Yes. We should turn our horses loose here, before the dungeon starts affecting them. They'll find their way back out of the Vale. Maybe." Taya turned to the wizard. "Turn them loose? What are you talking about?" He dismounted and started unpacking his animal. "We can't leave them anywhere near the entrance. They'd go insane." "How are we supposed to get home?" she asked a bit loudly, but followed his lead in jumping down. "We can worry about that if we come back." "You mean when we come back, right? Right? Shit." They had just gathered the last of their gear and sent the horses on their way when Taya picked up the sound of someone screaming. "Did you?" "I hear it," Wendell answered tersely. "Where's it coming from?" They both turned, trying to locate the source of the shrill cries, but the hills and cloud around them made it nearly impossible. Finally, Taya pointed. "There! Coming over that rise!" The wizard turned to see two small figures running down the slope of a nearby hill. Whoever they were headed right for the entrance to the dungeon. "Come on," ordered Wendell, grabbing his pack and jogging toward the entrance. Taya hesitated only a moment before doing the same. The passage into the Volscork catacombs was little more than a dark tunnel flanked by a pair of huge rectangular stones. They looked like they might have once been covered in carved glyphs, but the markings were much too worn to make out now. They reached the portal only a minute before the figures, who they could now see were short females. "Children? Here?" commented Taya. "Those aren't younglings. They're elves." "But why are they—" "Get inside!" yelled one of the two females, pointing to the entrance. Taya was about to say something else when an arrow planted itself into the ground about 2 inches from her left foot. "What the—" "Orcs!" called Wendell, staring at the top of the ridge. About 24 of the large, brutish humanoids were just starting down the slope. "Do as she says. Go!" The wizard reached into his pocket and snapped the small twig he found there. A blue light flashed around him for a moment. He saw Taya swinging her shield around to the side while she, too, ran for the shelter. Arrows were zinging by all around them now, a number pinging against the invisible field of magic that he had put around himself, falling harmlessly to the ground. "Keep going," he commanded before turning to face the hill. Somehow, the pair of elves had managed to avoid the rain of deadly shafts, but he knew their luck wouldn't last long enough to reach the dungeon. He would need to intervene if they had any chance of survival. He carefully mumbled a few choice words as he raised his staff and then tilted it down toward the horde of orcs. With a final hup, a bright stroke of lightning completed the connection between the top of his staff and the ground in front of the orcs. A ball of light formed and then blossomed into a mini sun for a fraction of a second. Wendell knew to close his eyes, and the elves were facing the other way. Not so the orcs, who caught the flash face on. Most were blinded, and those that weren't were at least stunned enough that the dashing females now had enough time to reach the refuge of the tunnel. He followed them in, and with the tap of his staff, the top lit up in a dull glow, bright enough to illuminate the passage forward. "There should be an anteroom just inside, to the right," he said, encouraging the group forward. "Shouldn't we take battle positions?" asked the lieutenant. One of the two elves snorted. "That's awfully brave of you, but you need not worry. They won't follow us in here. Orcs are dumb, but they're not that dumb." "I'm not certain I should be comforted by that fact." "Turn there," said Wendell behind them. The anteroom had stone benches running the length of 2 walls and a quietly bubbling fountain in the very center. "The benches are okay. Don't touch the water," he added. Setting down her gear, but not her spear, Taya took a good look at their new companions. To her surprise, the pair looked nearly identical, save for the fact that one had on a red scarf and the other a green one. Green scarf flopped to the ground on her back, exhausted, and the other dropped onto a bench. She had never seen elves before, but had heard enough about them. About 140 centimeters in height, they were considerably shorter than an average human, and of course, like most humanoid creatures from the Vale, their ears were pointed. They wore simple leather skirts that ended just above the knee, boots, and shirts of unremarkable quality. They did not appear armed, though she knew better than to trust the observation. After a moment's thought, she reached over and snagged one of the water pouches off her pack and handed it to the seated elf. The other's eyes widened for a second, but she then took the offering, nodding thanks. She drank deeply before handing the skin to her friend. Refreshed, she turned to Wendell.
"You're a wizard," she acknowledged. "And lucky for us, if you hadn't zapped those orcs as you did, I dare say we'd be supper. Many thanks."
He nodded. "I'm not entirely sure I did you a favor. Unless I miss my guess, those were Hewlick tribe orcs, yes?"
"You know your Vale folk, human. Indeed, they were."
"Hewlick tribe?" asked Taya. "Why is that important?" The elf on the floor spoke up.
"They won't leave. They won't follow us in, but they aren't about to give up and go away either. So as long as they can still smell us in here, they'll wait."
Taya glanced over at Wendell. The elf on the bench caught it.
"Oh, you're not planning on going out anytime soon, are you? You're going in after the runestone, am I right? I bet I'm right."
"You are," confirmed the wizard. She shook her head.
"Damn fool humans. You know what awaits you in there."
She thumbed the passage out of her anteroom.
"Especially for her." She then indicated Taya.
"We weren't given a choice. Royal edict."
"Ouch. Okay, that sucks. Just out of curiosity, did you have a plan for getting back out once you had the runestone? Maybe something we could both use?"
Wendell raised his brows, thinking. He wasn't sure he should trust the elves, but he detected no malice or untruth in them, so he decided to take a risk. "Perhaps. It relates to information I have on which specific stone resides in this dungeon. I have it on authority that the rune is Charding." The elf on the floor sat up.
"The traveling stone?"
"Indeed."
Redscarf picked it up. "So, you don't really need an escape plan. You just need to get to the runestone. Then you can use its power to take you anywhere you want to go. Not bad, human. Of course, that means you have to actually get to the stone, which is no doubt at the far end of this dungeon."
"To make matters even more interesting," he continued, "I'm very much assuming that we can even get it to work. While I know a fair amount of the stone's history and ritual, there could be all sorts of restrictions and requirements I am unaware of."
"Like what?" asked Taya,
feeling genuinely discouraged for the first time since they set out. "Well, suppose it only works on a full moon, or any place except this dungeon. It could require a blood sacrifice to operate, or a complex collection of specific elements in a specific quantity, or—"
Okay, interrupted the elf on the floor. "We get the idea. It's a huge risk."
"There's one restriction that is highly likely, given that the same kind of restriction is mentioned in some of the other 7 stones, and that's how often it can be used, only once in a lunar period."
"Why is that important?" asked Taya.
Wendell turned to face her directly. "Because my original plan, Lieutenant, was to leave you here in this anteroom and make my way through the dungeon alone. Once I had the stone, I could use it to travel back to this room, and we would be on our way. Those not-so-friendly Hewlick outside have scrapped that idea, since it would leave us right where we are now."
"You would have left me here?"
The wizard rolled his eyes. "To protect you from what resides in these halls? Yes. I'm bound to your uncle, the king. I must obey his command or find a new sect. I knew what I was getting into here. Not so you. I would never risk you to the decrepitude that awaits in this place if it were within my ability to prevent it, especially since it's likely your uncle is merely satisfying his own cruel vendetta."
"That's all very touching, human," said the elf on the bench. "But what you're really saying is that anyone who wants to have any chance of all getting out of this place—"
Needs to go with me through the dungeon, he finished.
And there you have it. Did you like this story? Tell me what you think. Call the voicemail line at 571-297-3325. Send me an email. Find me on Twitter. All those ways to contact me can be found on the podcast website at nobilis.libsyn.com. Patrons of the Nobilis Erotica podcast enjoy monthly episodes of my fantasy serial, Bra of Holding. Patrons will shortly be getting Chapter 18, but by pledging now, you can download all of them. You have been listening to the Nobilis Erotica podcast. Theme music is composed and performed by Mass Relay. This podcast is released under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives license. Until next time, listen hard.